When looking at the kinetic chain, specifically the posterior chain, hamstrings and glutes kind of go hand to hand as far as their functions. The glutes are a big hip extensor, should be some of the most powerful and strong muscles within the body. A lot of times though, the glutes aren't activating the way they should. When that happens, because the hamstring is a synergist, which means it's supposed to assist with the motion but not be the prime muscle that's doing that motion. When it comes to hip extension, glutes aren't firing the right way. Hamstrings will actually pick up more slack and do more work. A lot of times this leads to increased stiffness and tension within the hamstrings themselves, could lead to hamstring strains. So that's why it's important when you get to those situations, you don't just stretch the hamstring, but you look elsewhere to see how other muscles are firing, to see what is the issue. In this situation, when I see people with hamstring issues, always check to see any inhibition in the glutes, always check through the posterior chain, the calf, the plantar surface of the foot, the great toe even, to see if there are any issues, because that could lead to long-term hamstring problems, tightness, stiffness, or strains that are left unresolved. So when that's the case, what we want to do is work on activating the glutes. What I like to do is to first get into this, what I call forearm hip extension. If we're down in this position, our focus is really not overly arching the back. We're trying to keep the back nice and flat as we extend the hip and really isolate and activate the glute as we go up. So if you notice, a lot of my clients in particular, when they find this for the first time, they'll lift the hip up, they'll feel the hamstring doing most of the work. What we want to do is really focus on squeezing, focusing 100%, get our attention on the glute, get the hip to extend to raise up without the hamstring doing all the work. So as you get into this position, I'm going to consciously think before I lift the leg up, okay, squeeze my butt and then extend. But I'm not going so high that my back is arching. I'm just trying to extend the hip, try to isolate that, squeeze the butt, drive up, trying to put the bottom of the foot right on the ceiling as I go through this hip extension. Once I do that and I kind of build that connection with the glute, that I can control it specifically and isolate that muscle group, what I want to do then is flip over, go into what's called the Cook hip lift. If you notice you have some glute inhibition, this movement itself might be pretty shaky to start with. You'll notice you don't have that control and the stability to drive the hips up off the ground. But what it looks like is digging the heel in. I'm going to hold this other leg knee to chest, or what you could also do is between that thigh and the rib cage, I'm going to try to hold that ball in place. That's how I know how much flexion I want to get into. So what I'm going to do is dig the heel in. 1, 2, rest. 1, 2, rest. So that Cook hip lift is a very good exercise to help use the glutes to get into a greater degree of hip extension. If you notice as you go through any of those that the hamstrings are doing most of the work, a lot of times people feel like the hamstrings are cramping. That's when we know specifically the glutes aren't firing to their fullest extent. So we're using the hamstrings to do too much work, they're becoming overworked, and that's when you tend to get tightness, the cramping sensation, or possibly any kind of pain if you had a previous hamstring strain. So in terms of hamstring flexibility, if you notice you have tightness in the hamstrings, look at the glutes, try the forearm hip extension, try the Cook hip lift, see if you notice any issues as you go through and try to activate the glute. If you do, work on those things. In a few days to weeks, retest, see how the hamstrings feel. If you feel like range of motion is good, it's better, you still feel the stiffness or it might have resolved, see if that's part of your issue, because you'll be surprised a lot of times if certain muscles aren't activating, other muscles are overworking. Overworking leads to stiffness, tension, and tightness.